Welcome. Welcome to Escaping Dystopia. I am your pumpkin tonight. My name is Roy. The pumpkin disappears when he drinks. Pardon me. Sorry about the delay this evening. I was trying to do something new for tonight because I was going to be all creative and stuff. But it didn't work out right exactly like that, so not going to worry about it too much. I got like a new thing. I was going to stand up and do this whole thing. Anyway, we'll work on that. The reason we didn't is because my printer doesn't work. So I couldn't print out the show, and then I'd have to look at it. Anyway, so many technical difficulties. Tonight, what we're going to talk about, just running real quick. And just for everybody, welcome to the show. My name's Roy. We're probably friends. This is Escaping Dystopia. This is my weekly talk show where I go into my basement and rant about stuff. So the things we're going to talk about tonight will be our President Trump and the country of Niger and the 4 soldiers who were killed there on a mission. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. We're going to talk about Flake, Corker, McCain, and W, and then go all RINO. We'll talk about what that means. Talk about the chaos strategy, which I think is what's going on right now with our country. And then the sub-side of that is going to be Bannon versus the GOP, which has been interesting to watch. The Puerto Rico contracting is a big story this week, so we're going to talk about that some. The bump stock ban update. How you doing, Joe? Good to hear from you. The bump stock ban update, which I can do really, really quickly. The tax cut stuff, which we should have some more info next week. We'll talk about that a little bit later on tonight. And the new FCC broadcasting rules, which is so exciting. I know this is just like core rule-making policy of, what's the FCC been up to this week, folks? And then tomorrow, Google, Twitter, and Facebook are going to testify. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about what they're going to testify about. And then the good news for the week is that Joe Arpaio is still guilty. He may have been pardoned, and I think unless we get rid of that cat up top, there's going to be a lot of bad idiot, whatever, kind of people pardoned. But that doesn't excuse their crimes, and that's the thing. In order to be pardoned, you got to be guilty, because that's kind of the way it's going to work. And hopefully that'll stay as long as we don't get the Supreme Court backed. And with that, folks, let's do this. Welcome to Escaping Dystopia. All right. So the big story this last week, I think, in my humble opinion, this has been interesting to watch because, folks who watch this show probably know our president was a draft dodger back in the day. He got a medical deferment because of bone spurs in one foot or another. He tends to have a difficult time remembering which foot it was that kept him from going to war. Him being a wealthy, elitist heir to a real estate empire in the city of New York. His own personal Vietnam was avoiding STDs at that point in time in the 80s. There was a lot of stuff going around. These are actual quotes. Anyway, so what happened? So on October 3rd, the 4th here, I think, there was an ambush. Looks like there were a group of soldiers were trying to go from one place to another. Something about their mission had changed. They didn't get the air support they needed, and they were killed by some, I believe it was Al-Qaeda paramilitary group, about 50 or so after him. The president didn't speak about this for nearly 2 weeks. And after about 12 days, the press finally asked about it, and how he responded was to blame Obama for not caring enough about the soldiers and those who had died during the war. He also said, I call everybody, I think, pretty much, right? Everybody. And then it turned out, so they didn't, that's not exactly what happened, and the AP did a thing where about half of the people who have lost family members have not gotten a call, and others have. But it sounds like, from what I could tell, he asked General Kelly, who's one of his advisors there, about because Kelly had lost his son in Iraq in, I believe, 2010. And so Kelly, I think, relayed a story to the president about something that had given him comfort. But Kelly's a little bit different than most families, and certainly any spouse, because Kelly is a military veteran and understands, the risk, and that notion of, and that was the whole quote. He know what he signed up for, right? And everybody knows what they sign up for, but it was just kind of the whole callousness of the remark. But for someone who comes from a military family, there's a way that you could say that it wouldn't really be callous at all, and that it's a sense of, he knew what he was getting into, this sense of honorable stepping into the fire when you know that it's burning, that sense, that same kind of phrase. And that was the thing, though, because then Trump tried to use it for this widow and didn't go over so well. And now this is the part where it gets all nasty, right? Because then you have the congresswoman who apparently was a mentor to the soldier who was killed and was a family friend and was in the car when this call went down and was somewhat outraged about this, and then went to the press with that and quote-unquote politicized the call and the situation, and what the family seemed to feel was a lack of respect. There was a few days where this kind of went on a little bit, and then earlier Monday this week, I believe, the widow came out and gave an interview and confirmed a lot of the congresswoman's account. I think this is kind of a new low for a lot of people. When you kind of look at that and kind of talk about it from the sense of that new disgusting normal, which this is not normal, this is very, very wrong. But having the president kind of just be that kind of disrespectful to a family. He has since come out and said, we were fine. And he's called her a liar a couple times, but in the way that he does it, where he just says, "Oh, well, I think that this is what's going on," and you can think what you want to think. So Wilson is 100% exonerated, and one of the things that's just so odd about this whole story, well, actually, why it becomes important, because remember, part of what they're doing is they're thinking is that most people don't give a crap about politics, so they're not going to care one way or another if Trump is lying about this, that, or that. Everybody lies about this, that cynical, mushy middle, and then the Republicans will just come over. So a lot of this stuff, he's not worried about it, but he does need to keep his base happy. And one of the things that they are very much and love him for is the pro-military stance. And if it comes out that this kind of draft dodger who said some nasty things and gone after some other families again does this same kind of stuff and shows this kind of disrespect for the people who are doing this, that could really, really hurt him, especially since, on the economic side, he's not going to be able to do anything to help those families as well. So there's another aspect of this that kind of came out a little bit as they're asking the president a little bit more of some of the details, like, well, what did these people die for? What was the point of this? Were you aware of this? And he's like, this is not, my thing. This is, I told them what to do. These are the generals. They did this. You have to talk to them, kind of thing. And this is absolutely, I think, what he's done, and across the board, I think, for a lot of our military, has just basically said, all right, you guys go do what you got to do. Just delegating the authority, giving the broad goals of go win the war, go beat ISIS. Okay, you guys know how to do this? Good. There's not a whole lot of hands-on, certainly not to the point where he's aware of this stuff. He's too busy golfing. And there's a whole lot of just him not doing the work kind of thing where he's just tends to be oblivious. And now we've seen one situation where that's going to come back and haunt him a little bit. We'll see if this continues. The way our news cycle works nowadays, it's really hard for things to stick. But at the same time, they do pile up. And when people do pay attention and see this, they're going to try and move on from it, but which brings us to our next thing, where you're going to have now 3 GOP senators, and Flake, Corker, and McCain, using the Senate floor, and this is to at least do some verbal resistance against the abnormality of today. They've gone, and I said this was my quote, they kind of go RINO, that RINO stands for Republican in name only. It's a bit of a dig that the Republicans use for people who are no longer really Republicans, which is what is going to be going on here. They had some really good speeches. McCain's speech before killing the healthcare vote was good. Flake's speech I read the other day I think was also good. He then voted with them. Corker they're all in for the tax cuts, which is the big thing that's coming up. We'll talk about that in a minute. But they're giving out these speeches, and we'll see. Corker kind of went out this week and did the media, the 5-spot thing, talking to everybody about the same kind of stuff just to get it out there. Because the guy's watching TV, so if you want to talk to him, you get on TV and talk to him. How ridiculous is that? But anyway. What's up, Nita? How you doing tonight? Having a good one? So anyway, they go on TV and totally throw it at his face. So they did, but they all have started to do a little bit of verbal pushback, which is good. That's kind of one of the things that's going to happen a little bit, and then we'll see though how long this goes on, and we'll talk to that here in the next couple segments. But they're still kind of not going directly after the guy. And Bush was actually, because I did mention W in this situation, because W gave a speech that again was had some nice rhetorical flourishes, but without the direct address of being like, I'm a president. I used to be president. My dad, he's president, and we wanted to say to you, Donald, you gotta stop or something, right? I mean, it has to be that blatant. I think we'll see, because we're on, the edge a little bit, and nothing's really happened. See, that's the thing that's really strange about this, because so many things feel like there's a lot of more craziness going on, but that hasn't really hit yet. The storm hasn't happened. The stock market, the bubble, if there is one, right, hasn't burst yet. And so you have this great deal of stability and momentum built into our economy and to a certain degree some of our systems of government from the Obama years. So that, I thought that coast, I don't know what I've said, but about a year or so on that, have the GOP budget taking over. This is what their new stuff is, so they can try and do some tax cuts. You have now where those years of budgets for a lot of those services and various groups, this is again the, what was it from the Star Trek? Not the general, but I'll have to remember that. This is one of my early episodes, like that whole function of government, keeping things running. We're going to start hitting budget problems now. Particularly like today, they talked about the opioid declaration of, I think it was an emergency, but there's a couple levels of this. He didn't do the higher level, which would have allowed some emergency funding. So there is no more extra funding going to a lot of this stuff. So you're going to start to see some of these start to break down a little bit more. This is first happening with the national parks, as they started to float the idea today of raising the entrance fee to the national parks for $300 million, something like that. It was Zinke and this. $70 for a day. The $300 million thing, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that does also go back to the Secretary of the Interior. And anyway, so you have a few of these Republicans going against a little bit, but it's not going to be enough yet, because this brings us to the next thing. And I'm actually going to skip down to the Bannon versus the GOP, because these three, right, Corker, Moore, and Flake. Now, Moore, I haven't mentioned yet, Roy Moore, he's the one in Alabama who wants to take over. He don't think Muslims should be Americans, and doesn't think gay people are decent folk, just by definition. There's a few more of these coming, and this is going to be the turnover as you're replacing some of the folks, because McCain's not going to be back, Corker's not going to be back, Flake's not going to be back. And it takes, as we know already, just 4 or 5 senators on the edge to flip the Senate. And as you start to do that, you take the cruise wing of the GOP, That's Bannon. And the way they get into it, and there was a good article about this the other day, and I've posted this other long article about this, but the way that we've changed the funding of our politics has allowed more extremists to step into place. And the checks and gatekeepers on power that we used to have largely faded away through both reform efforts and some other kinds of ways, like the corruption's become a little systemic, and then you have some court rulings, and the Citizens United stuff. You have some blurrings of the lines on media. Like, is Fox like a constant commercial for the GOP? Like, shouldn't that, like, so you have all this blurrings of the lines that have gone so far that allows this kind of insurgency to take place, backed by a couple billionaires, and just fights over the party infrastructure. Now that they have the presidency, that's a really, 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 really big chess piece on the board of party control. And the longer they stay there, the more it's going to tilt that way. I don't see how it can't, unless, well, this is going to be where the interesting part is, of course, the elections. And when you have these more extremist nominees, but they're going to come in places in a lot of the more rural states where, again, like, the more liberal folks just don't want to be there, and so those plates will continue to trend more and more extreme, right? So you have a couple of vicious cycles going on here, and the longer that you have these people winning, it's going to get a little bit worse. So we're going to keep an eye on that. But there's part of this on the other side, and this is the chaos strategy I was talking about. I do think it's very much an intentional part on the administration and their just general strategy to build this confusion and just everything going wrong kind of feel, or everything's crazy going on kind of feel, even when it's not. I think the idea here is essentially do this for a few years, break up all these agreements that we're in, like the TPP that we did and the Paris Climate Accord. From what it looks like, we're gonna be out of NAFTA here in the next couple months, or at least start to do that. And again, the idea is, well, we'll just renegotiate a new one, and then the idea is going to be for the next presidential cycle, say, well, we don't have any of these deals. Who's the best negotiator around? Hey, it's me. So they're going to run on refixing all these things that he's broken, with this massive chaos going on, and him being, I'm the only one who can fix this. I know exactly how all this stuff works now. I figured it out. It's taking a little while, blah, blah. Anyway, I think that's what I call the chaos strategy, and we're still in the ramping up of the chaos. And this is after coming out of, no drama Obama, right, who wouldn't, react to a fly and had the thickest skin that I've probably ever seen in a politician. And now we've got somebody who's, just transparently reactive. But I do think that's part of what's going on here. So we'll see how it goes when we hit an actual crisis. The closest that I don't know that we've got anywhere close to much on that yet. But the Niger thing is interesting because now we're talking a little bit of life and death of Americans. It's odd too, of course, that 58, was it, Americans getting gunned down wasn't a crisis. And that's part of the very, very nasty bias that's going on, and that again is more dangerous the longer it goes on. So I spoke a little bit earlier about that $300 million. Apparently there was a contract awarded to some folks to rebuild the Puerto Rican power grid. And at the time of the hurricane, the company that got the bid consisted of two dudes in is it Whitefish, Montana? Is that where it was? It's Whitefish Energy. I don't know if that was the name of the town. It's a town of about 1,000 people, where these folks do some handyman stuff around town, and they're friends with the Interior Secretary. And somehow they got this contract. A whole bunch of people are going to investigate this. We'll see how far that goes. But at the same time, we're moving on from what's going on in Puerto Rico, and it doesn't sound like it's getting much better there at all. So not sure what we can do but other try and keep the attention on it. But with the way that the media system works now, it's going to be really hard to pay attention to something important for a long term where there's not money involved for us to be made. And speaking of money to be made, and again, that what it should have been a crisis massacre, the bump stock was supposed to be, the idea was we were going to get rid of those. Bump stocks being something that you can use to modify a semi-automatic weapon to make it into an automatic weapon pretty simply with a little bit of engineering. It's not that hard to ban them and enforce it and expand it to, you know, anything that kind of modifies this into that and then update it. We've seen no movement in Congress, which to me just it's difficult to deal with and accept. I think we need to make it clear now moving forward that if you want any kind of rational legislation, you're going to have Democrats in power when it comes to gun control. We're also now, there's a big question, let's moving on to one of the big political things for the next couple weeks, the tax cuts that the GOP is going to publish. I guess the plan is to see next week, next Wednesday or so, what the actual plan is. Somehow, despite 8 years of talking about this stuff, they don't actually know what the plan is. It looks like it's starting to shape up a little bit because, again, they get to mess around with budget rules. They can pass it with only 50 votes if they only run a deficit, a projected deficit of $150 billion a year, right? From where we are now. We're already running a $400 billion deficit. But if they only add $150 billion a year to it, they can pass their new budget with 51 votes. So that's what they're trying to do. And that's the actual, when you ask them about the details of the plan, it's like, well, it's a plan that can get 50 votes. And then Pence gets to break the tie. That's what the plan is. I'm like, well, what do you mean? What's in the plan? Well, you know, whatever it's going to take to get 50 votes. Yes, but specifically about tax rates, yes, I know, the tax rates, deductions, loopholes, all that. Yeah, what's going to be in there is going to be what it takes to get... So we'll find out next week what's in there. And then there will be some sort of kind of, much like with the healthcare thing, a massive mobilization quickly to try and get people into stopping that shit. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I don't think they're going to get it. But they did get this bank rule in, going against one of their old boogeymen, which is people who represent lots of other people in court, trial lawyers. So that's why they made it so you can't sue banks because of trial lawyers. So anyway, that's what that happened last night. Oh, and yeah, I did the little video about it this morning. But yeah, one of the things that they're trying to justify the tax cuts with is the notion that because we'll be a more competitive, quote-unquote, with our statutory tax rate, our corporate tax rate, a bunch of the industries that have moved overseas for cheaper labor will move back here for lower tax rates than nothing. Wait, why would they come back? And then the idea is that they would come back, and so many will come back because so much winning, right? There will be so much demand for workers, wages will go up. And see, that's how it trickles down. Don't you see? We give them huge tax cuts. They do something completely irrational, and then you guys make more money. So this, I mean, it's been really on display now. I'm laughing because I was messing with a hardcore conservative on this kind of stuff. Somebody I've messed with before the other day to talk about these tax cuts and how ridiculous they are. Nobody really likes them except for big money, and so they might pass. I mean, that's going to be... There's a weird dynamic we're here in the U.S. where a lot of stuff, a lot of issues are 60, 70, 80% to 20, 30, 40%, right? But when you weight those issues by who wants stuff, by how much, who has what money, and how it is important to everybody else, then it changes quite a bit. Most of, and Lawrence Lessig, he's a good kind of an activist on this issue, has pointed out that, I mean, 99% of the money that flows to our politicians especially now with the loss of unions, comes from a lot of the 1%. Those are the only people who have the kind of extra money laying around to invest, as it were, in politics. And they do. And that's what the tax cuts are about. So we'll see how this is going to go. We're so close. Back in November. Has it been a year already? See, quarter of the way there, even if it goes the long way. So the FCC, and speaking of the long way, and this is one of the things that makes it difficult and more likely that the longer that the Trump people stay in power, the longer they'll stay in power. Because one of the things that they're doing now is saying that local broadcasters, right, TV and radio stations, no longer need to have a local studio in order to continue to qualify for a license to broadcast to a local area. Remember, radio and TV signals are limited by physics and how much power you put into the antenna and send out, how far you can send it out. But because of that, there's some massive economies of scale you get for if you just have the power to send out that signal. A lot of people will pay you a little bit of money or a lot of money to put stuff on that signal to advertise. And so it's a lot of these, the broadcasting license thing, one of the things that the president was threatening to revoke for people who criticize him, aka the fake news. Owning one of these licenses, they are real things, and they do pretty much count as a license to print money because of the economies that you can create by owning a slice of our airwaves and a bit of the frequencies with which we transmit radio and TV signals. By getting rid of that requirement that you have to have that local station even, now you can rebroadcast the same signal from wherever, and you have no... This has been a big problem already that's happened with consolidation. You used to not be able 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or actually I guess in the mid-90s, this was before Clinton deregulated, you couldn't own more than like 8 radio stations. And then they said, or 6 and certain number in the large markets, and also not TV in the same station. So this led to, a more diverse media situation. And then they allowed for the consolidation by just basically getting rid of ownership caps. And so these large networks of radio stations could get together. This is where Clear Channel and these other guys came from, because you can own all these stations, put together 3 playlists, and sell national advertising. Because one of the issues they had previously with radio is that you couldn't sell to a national client. It was really hard to, get up that. Anyway, so you can make a lot. You go one person, hey, how many Tide commercials do you want to buy? And then, bam, big money. And you can only get those with national. So this led to big consolidation, big money, mo money, mo money. But again, this is good for business, not necessarily good for the people. Jim Wright has a great thing up. I'll have to share this. I actually was reading this earlier, and gives example after example about this notion of that we've kind of been ingrained that what's good for business is good for everybody, but that's not what it really has been happening for the last 30 years in this country. So when you actually compare the rhetoric to the reality, it leaves a bit to be desired, shall we say. Speaking of which, this takes us to Google, Twitter, and Facebook. They're all going to testify. Representatives from those corporate entities will testify regarding their responsibility regarding the Russian hacking of our election. So again, going back to those broadcast things I was just talking about. So those rules, you have rules in there, laws in place that prohibit foreign governments from buying airtime to advertise on our airwaves during our election cycles. And actually a lot of other times there's a number of limits. These limits do not apply to the internets, the webs. No, they don't. So Google, Twitter, and Facebook can all take money from foreign entities in order to sell advertisements during an election cycle that are micro-targeted. One of the things that you should look into, and there's a few stories, I need to send a couple of these, I've read these, but Facebook allows ridiculous targeting and micro, just special things, and they were sending out, talking about 20, 30, 40,000 different types of ads sent, and 10 to 20, 30, 40 people by zip code. All right, what appeals to this person? What's the most effective here? And they had really, really good stuff. It's really pretty intense. And when you mix that kind of stuff with the foreign influence, you have some very powerful media interaction. And you have it in a changing media landscape where people are still learning good information, bad information. Who's setting up this anti-immigrant rally down in Houston? Is it, some good old rednecks, or is it Russian agents? And they literally did stuff like that and they had stuff where they were advertising for self-defense classes for black people in South Carolina to be ready for the race war and stuff like that. And you couldn't, as a foreign entity, buy a TV commercial to sell that stuff. But on the internet, you can. And so they're going to testify that a little bit tomorrow, and we'll see if anything comes out of that. I'll keep you up to date. That's more of a little bit of my background in education, was mass media, and the government stuff was always just fun. So anyway, on the good news thing, like I said, Arpaio's still guilty. Racist prick, still a racist prick, still goes down in the books as being guilty, even if he doesn't have to rot in jail until he dies. Oh well. Sorry, guy's a douchebag, man. If you read about a lot of the stuff that he did, that was just another white supremacist play, and that was for me, one of those last kind of straws. Like, all right, this guy, speaking of our president, is not going to try and get along with everyone. He's going to play to his core, and his core is going to try and take over the GOP. So that's what we're seeing now, and they're fighting back a little bit. The only way they can really fight back is with the votes, because this is a democracy, right? Right? It is. We're still okay. For the bit. But anyway, thanks for folks dropping by and stuck around. Always nice to see you folks. And have a good evening. Have a happy Halloween. I'll see you next week probably when I'm a little bit older. All right. Peace out, y'all.